Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Louise Egan, and I will be moderating this press conference. Governor Macklem will take your questions for the next 20 minutes or so. We have quite a few reporters on the line, so I'm going to ask you to limit yourself to one question each, only, without a follow-up. If we do have time at the end, we'll go to a second round. Before you ask your name, please state your name and affiliation. And finally, remember to mute your line if you're not asking a question. You can do that by pressing *6, and you can unmute your line by pressing *7. Avant de poser une question, veuillez vous identifier, s'il vous plaît. Libre à vous de poser vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Pour mettre votre ligne en mode discrétion, appuyez sur l'étoile 6. Pour l'enlever, faites étoile 7. And the first question is from Vincent Foisy, Radio-Canada. Go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, c'est Vincent Foisy de Radio-Canada ici. J'aimerais voir avec vous, tantôt vous avez évoqué très rapidement les autres banques centrales, mais j'aimerais voir avec vous, quand vous regardez les autres pays qui, eux, ont déjà des plans de relance, ont déjà annoncé ce qu'ils allaient faire pour relancer l'économie, est-ce qu'il y a des choses concrètement que vous avez vues qui vous intéresse et qui vous dites que le Canada devrait emboîter le pas à ces pays. Et j'aimerais ça que vous soyez le plus concret et spécifique possible sur les mesures, s'il vous plaît.
Merci pour la question. La pandémie, c'est global. Tous les pays, tous les citoyens du monde sont affectés. Et donc, toutes les banques centrales autour du monde sont en train d'essayer d'appuyer la reprise et stabiliser l'inflation. Quelques pays sont un peu plus avancés que nous. La Chine, par exemple, est avancée à peu près un trimestre. Et ça nous donne des indications que sont les réactions des dépenses, que sont les réactions des entreprises. Et l'autre aspect, c'est plusieurs banques centrales, comme nous, utilisent maintenant des outils comme l'assouplissement quantitatif. Quelques-uns utilisent le contrôle du courbe de rendement, yield curve control. Et ces outils sont assez nouveaux. Donc, ils sont implémentés dans chaque pays de manière un peu différente. Et donc, c'est très utile de mettre nos têtes ensemble et apprendre comment exactement il se marche dans les différents pays. Comme j'ai mentionné dans mon discours, on va faire un assessment, on va évaluer tous les effets de l'assouplissement quantitatif sur l'économie.
Next question. Excuse-moi, c'est seulement une question pour le moment. I'm going to move to Tony Mace of Mace News, followed by Greg Quinn of Market News, and then Jordan Press of Canadian Press. Go ahead, Tony.
Thank you, Governor. How do you think about the Canadian dollar's recent strength? How does that affect your view of the economic outlook and your policy considerations?
New governors often get themselves into trouble talking about the Canadian dollar. What we have seen in the last couple of months is we've seen really more the last month, we've seen a broad-based depreciation of the U.S. dollar. And with that, you're seeing most currencies appreciate against the U.S. dollar, Canadian dollar included. It's appreciated a little bit less than some others. And that is certainly something that we will take into account as we assess the amount of monetary stimulus required in the economy going forward. Our next decision which will come with a monetary policy report, and with that, a revised central scenario. We will be taking into account any movements in the Canadian dollars in our own assessment of how much monetary stimulus is needed.
Thank you. Greg Quinn, Market News.
Good afternoon. Yesterday's statement said you could calibrate asset purchases or quantitative easing. Can you give us any more thoughts on what that would mean, like the pace of securities that you're buying, what kind of assets you'd buy, or maybe focusing the purchases differently than going all across the yield curve?
Greg, we've been adjusting our bond buying program as we move from containment to reopening. And really the purpose of that sentence yesterday was to just remind everybody that as we move from reopening to recuperation, we will be continuing to calibrate, or if you want a simpler word, adjust our quantitative easing program to deliver the amount of monetary stimulus needed to support the recovery and get inflation back to target. Let me take you back when we started our large-scale asset purchasing program. We were very much focused on restoring well-functioning markets, and in that context, the focus was very much buying bonds at the short end of the yield curve with relatively short maturities. With the restoration of relatively normal market functioning and with the reopening of the economy, our focus has shifted from market functioning to supporting the recovery. And with that, we have adjusted our bond buying program. We've shifted buying further out the yield curve, particularly 2, 3, 5, 10 years. These are the maturities where monetary policy has its biggest effect. These are the maturities where households and businesses are typically borrowing, and by keeping the government curve down, we're reducing the cost of borrowing for households and businesses and supporting the recovery. So when we say we're going to be calibrating going forward, what that means is that we will be assessing what to buy as well as how much to buy. Could be more, could be less. Let me just underline a couple other sentences, though. We repeated our forward guidance. We will hold the policy rate at the effective lower bound until slack is absorbed to sustainably achieve our 2% inflation target. And we reinforce that with a commitment to maintain our QE program until the recovery is well underway. And the recovery is further underway than it was back in July, but we still have a long way to go.
I'm going to turn to Jordan Press of Canadian Press, and he'll be followed by Kim McCrail of Wall Street Journal and Julie Gordon of Reuters. Go ahead, Jordan.
Good afternoon, Governor. I just wanted to pick up on your speech today where you talked about the uneven recovery, but also how you can't target monetary policy to specific groups or sectors. And so I'm wondering if you can explain who exactly are you hoping here's your message from today and about that uneven recovery and the risk that it could pose, and then as well, what do you expect them to do in response?
So, as you highlighted, Jordan, monetary policy can't target specific sectors or specific people or workers. But the stronger the recovery is, the more durable the recovery is, the more there will be broad-based opportunity for Canadians. And the more there's broad-based opportunity for Canadians, the stronger will be the recovery and the more durable will be growth. Maybe a metaphor would help. My predecessor was known for his colorful metaphors, so let me try one. You can think of the monetary stimulus and the recovery like the tide coming in. When the tide comes in, that creates conditions for all boats to rise. Some boats have leaks. They're going to take on water. Some boats aren't even in the water. But when the tide comes in, it creates the conditions for all boats to rise. And that's what monetary policy, that's what monetary stimulus does. And our message to Canadians is this recovery is off to a strong start. We've seen some encouraging numbers, but we still have a long climb back, and we expect the pace of recovery is going to start to slow. We're going to be there creating the conditions for all boats to rise through the full length of this recovery.
Kim McCrail, Wall Street Journal. Next question is for you.
Hi, thanks. Governor Macklem, your speech noted a larger than expected rebound in household spending, and I think you attributed that to pent-up demand. Is there a risk that this will reverse itself as fiscal programs wind down, mortgage deferrals end, and the longer recuperation phase that the bank has talked about gets underway? And to what extent are you worried about what that might mean for housing markets?
Yes, Kim. As you've highlighted, and as we underscored in our press release, the rebound in the reopening phase has been a little bit stronger than we expected. That's encouraging. It has been uneven, though. It's been particularly focused on goods, durables, housing in particular. Services that involve close contact have generally been recovering more slowly. With respect to housing, as we highlighted, we do think a lot of this has to do with pent-up demand, or in other words, it was pretty difficult to buy a house during the containment phase, so this is a bit of catch-up from the containment phase, and we're seeing a burst of catch-up or pent-up demand is being released. We do expect the pace of housing activity growth to moderate going forward. As this pent-up demand gets worked off, uncertainty, household confidence, consumer confidence, it's off the bottom, but it's still not strong. Immigration is, for obvious reasons, lower during the pandemic. So there are some, and as I talked about it, quite a lot of detail in the speech, youth have been particularly affected by this recession. So the pace of household formation is likely to slow. So for all those reasons, we would expect housing activity to moderate somewhat going forward. And this is really part of the broader recuperation phase. Overall, we think the economy is going to be moving in the right direction, but as we move from reopening to recuperation, the pace is going to slow and it's going to get a little choppier.
Next question is from Julie Gordon of Reuters, and Julie will be followed by Émilie Bergeron, the QMI, and Dave Parkinson from the Globe and Mail. Julie, go ahead.
Hi, Governor. Thanks for taking the question. So I'm just going to push you back on housing again. As I'm sure you're aware, that's one area of the economy that's been on fire since the pandemic. Are you concerned that the bank's contributing to another bubble? And at what point do financial stability risks become more of a concern?
So, let me just reiterate, we think a considerable amount of this strong rebound in housing activity reflects pent-up demand. So we expect that we're not extrapolating going forward from these recent numbers. With respect to vulnerabilities related to high household indebtedness and housing, a couple of things. As I said, we think a lot of this boost is pent-up demand. Secondly, if you look at household credit growth, it's really quite modest. And if you look more broadly at income and savings and consumption, incomes have been reasonably well sustained. Consumption has slowed, and so savings overall in the economy has gone up. That's helpful in reducing vulnerabilities. Having said that, we've been very clear at the Bank of Canada. We've underlined the vulnerabilities caused by high household indebtedness and too much reliance on the housing sector. Those have not entirely gone away, but when you look at our policy response, the best predictor of whether somebody is going to repay their mortgage is whether they have a job. And that really speaks to the importance of supporting the recovery, getting people back to work. That will help us achieve our inflation target. It will also improve the stability of the financial system.
Next question is from Émilie Bergeron.
Oui, bonjour, M. Macklem. J'avais une question concernant les déficits projetés. Bon, on sait que pour cette année, avec les dépenses qui ont été engendrées par la pandémie, là, pour des dépenses gouvernementales, ça fait en sorte que le déficit va atteindre au moins 343 milliards de dollars. On peut présumer que dans les années suivantes, on peut s'attendre à d'imposants déficits aussi. Pendant combien de temps, pendant combien d'années la banque peut se permettre d'aller dans la direction d'importants déficits et à quel moment il faudrait commencer à avoir un plan pour peut-être plafonner les déficits?
D'accord. Laissez-moi commencer par souligner que notre programme d'assouplissement quantitatif est ancré sur notre cible d'inflation. On poursuit le programme d'assouplissement quantitatif parce que notre taux d'intérêt est sa plancher, valeur plancher. On ne peut pas le réduire plus. Et donc, on utilise le programme d'assouplissement quantitatif de réduire les taux d'intérêt plus loin de la courbe de rendement. Et ça, c'est comment on appuie la reprise. Donc, c'est pas pour le déficit. À ce point-là, je peux souligner que les programmes du gouvernement, le PCU ou CERB, les programmes de subventionner les salaires sont très importants pour aider les Canadiens pendant cette récession très sévère. Et ils sont aussi, surtout l'évolution de CERB à le programme plus expansionniste de assurance chômage ou assurance d'emploi et les subventions de salaire, cela sera important pour supporter la reprise. Pour la politique monétaire, nous prenons les politiques budgétaires, on les regarde. Ce sont les décisions pour le gouvernement. On les regarde et on prie ces politiques budgétaires. We take them into account quand nous faisons notre prévision et prend notre décision de politique monétaire.
Next question is from David Parkinson of Globe and Mail, followed by Shelley Hagan of Bloomberg and Kevin Carmichael of the Financial Post. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, hi, Governor. I just wanted to get back to something that Greg was asking earlier about the notion of recalibration on the QE program. One interpretation that I saw yesterday, and I was wondering if you can comment on it, is that, sort of taking a look at the fact that you were making a point about reminding people that recalibration is something that you have, I guess, something to do at this point. In addition to continuing to talk about the key rate itself as being at the effective lower bound, but perhaps this is an indication that when the bank is going to make any adjustments in the future, whether it's unwinding some of its stimulus or adding more, that the first place you're going to act is going to be in the QE side rather than on the rates. Can you comment on when the time comes, I guess, to start to unwind? Are we likely to see the bond program shrink before we start to see rates move?
Well, first, let me underline it's really very premature to start talking about exit. that's some ways off, and that's really reflected in our decision yesterday to continue our QE program at the current pace. With respect to, I guess what I can say with respect to going forward, what we have said is that we will hold the policy interest rate at the effective lower bound until slack is absorbed so that we can sustainably achieve our 2% inflation target. And we're reinforcing that with quantitative easing until the recovery is well underway. Now, logically, the recovery being well underway comes before slack is absorbed. So I think these things are still a long way off. We will have lots of time to assess the exit in the future, but we have tried to give some sense of the logical sequence.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. We are running out of time, but if we've got two more people on the list. So Shelley Hagan of Bloomberg, go ahead. And then if we have time, we'll go to Kevin Carmichael for the last question.
Hi, Governor Macklem. Could you provide some context on why there's been a stall in growth on the bank's balance sheet since mid-July?
That really reflects the fact that in the early days of the crisis, as I mentioned, the focus was very much on restoring well-functioning markets, and there was a large increase in repos, and the bond purchase programs were focused on very short-term maturities. So, as we roll forward, those with market functioning much improved, those short-term liquidity programs are not being used hardly at all. And so those assets are starting to roll off our balance sheet. So those short-term liquidity facilities, those are starting to roll off the balance sheet. At the same time, we are continuing to buy government bonds at a pace of at least $5 billion a week. And so that's going up, the other one's coming down. The overall effect right now is a leveling off.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Kevin Carmichael of Financial Post.
Okay, Kevin. You're going to have to be quick.
I will be quick. Governor, I wondered if you could be a bit more explicit about how your observations about the uneven recovery will factor into policy decisions going forward. I guess to borrow from your metaphor, might the central bank be willing to let the tide rise a little higher than you would at other times if they had a chance of pulling some of those boats, maybe that you mentioned being offshore, back into the water?
Kevin, as I said in my prepared remarks, I think it's very important that we understand the dynamics of this recession. And what I really was trying to get at is the unevenness affects the strength of the recovery. It affects the durability of the recovery. And while we can't target specific sectors or workers, the amount of stimulus we put in place will be calibrated to support the recovery, to support the durability of the recovery, because that is how you get inflation back to target and keep it there. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. That concludes the press conference. Thank you, Governor, and thanks for everybody for attending.